There you go.
We are recording to the cloud.
Great.
Modern world.
And there's all kinds of ways to display the people that are signing in here. Great. We're starting to get lots of folks joining in. Fantastic. We've got Frank, who's connected to NAI and actually going to be getting more and more involved in interpretive training. Kirby from the Forest, who's an interpretive ranger here. We've got someone, Susan Bertram from Wakamatsu Farm, American River Conservancy. Great, important historic site tied to the first Japanese colony in North America. Kelly Gwynn, Treasurer and Retail Coordinator for El Dorado National Forest Interpretive Association. And let's see, it looks like folks are still signing on and we've still got a couple minutes. Does anybody have any burning questions right now? And we'll ask everybody to mute themselves when the program starts, but for now, feel free if you have a question to unmute and ask it.
Hey Jennifer, it's Kirby. I do have a quick question about what we'll be covering today. I just really wanted to know if we're going to at all address anything in regards to interpretation during the time of COVID, or if this is more of just like a general training. I'm going to introduce you.
Yeah, well, I'll leave that to Cara, our instructor.
Yeah, so I don't have teaching on it specifically, and we'll have some space at the end to have some discussion about what you're interested in, so we can absolutely talk about that.
And Kirby, with that, I'll say that Peter Ostrowski, that is going to join us for session 2 next week, has been doing a lot of this with state parks and I think training their interpreters to do their programs virtual. I mean, he's been doing a lot of that specifically. State parks has really been, you know, making that transition in format a lot. So I think, and you know, we can also ask him to address, you know, some of those things. I think, Kirby, besides, you know, the ability to do things virtually, did you have other thoughts about, you know, specific topics related to COVID that are on your mind? Do you mean interpreting?
I guess I know that I know that national parks and state parks possibly are doing like a virtual ranger program. I guess that would be like a topic that I would be interested in hearing about, as far as like how that could potentially be implemented on the Forest Service side. But yeah, I was mostly just wondering if we were going to cover any kind of like challenges and obstacles that we face in interp, specifically, excuse me, with the COVID stuff.
And I think the virtual programs will definitely come up with guided walks and conducted activities next week. This is informal interpretation, and so you know, this would pertain to roving contacts and then, you know, visitor information contacts. So, you know, all the folks that are taking questions on the phone, you know, obviously our virtual ranger offices, this is going to pertain to that a lot. And then it will pertain to just roving contacts, which I know you and other folks that are out in the field are, you know, obviously encountering folks in, you know, the public out there, and, you know, COVID or not. And so I think this will be applicable, but we will get into virtual programs a little bit more next week. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of examples also out there. And so you can sort of see how they're doing it. And then the technology pieces, we may even need to do, you know, like a separate session on that, you know, if there's a lot of interest in just the nuts and bolts of cameras and microphones and technology.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. So go ahead.
Will this program be recorded and available later on also?
It will. It's being recorded right now. So just so you know, you are on the air. And Carl from ENFIA will be working with us to get this available through the ENFIA website one way or another. So yes, it will be available after today's session. And with that, again, just reminding the folks that are joining on, we're up to about 26 participants. We're expecting about 40. It's after 9 already, so we'll get started, but just want to remind everybody we're doing introductions in the chat. If you will go to the bottom of your menu, the bottom of your screen and pull up the menu, just use your cursor at the bottom, you'll find the chat link in the middle of your menu bar. And we're asking folks to just introduce themselves with name, role for whatever organization you're involved in, and place that you might be doing interpretation. And feel free to add multiple roles and places if that applies. So with that, I'll turn it over to our wonderful guest speaker presenter, Cara Stella from Yosemite National Park. And Cara, please introduce yourself appropriately.
Yes, I'm noticing that Claire just asked if she could have the PowerPoints. Did you get them, Jennifer?
I'm not sure if I got them, but we can certainly make them available afterwards. If you signed up through MFIA's website or Eventbrite, we have your email addresses. And if you didn't sign up that way, I'll make sure that you have an ability to email me at the end of the program.
Great.
And so, yes, we'll make those available as well. Perhaps we'll have those on MFIA's website where we put the program links.
Yep, that's great. So not in advance, but afterwards. Yeah, and I'll be giving you lots of material. I have a supplementary document that goes with the slides. So it should cover what we talk about today primarily. So hi, everyone. My name is Cara Stella, and I am the interpretive specialist, that is the interpretive trainer for Yosemite National Park. I have a secondary duty. I'm also the Park American Sign Language interpreter. We're the only national park that has one, so that's kind of a special thing that I get to do in addition. Both fields are called interpretation, so I'm the park's interpreter. And I am excited to have 2 hours with you today to talk about informal interpretation and what it looks like from what I understand. Many of you are new to interpretation altogether. And there's a lot of information, ground to cover. So I got my degree in interpretation at Humboldt State. If you can all put yourself on mute, somebody is echoing out there in the world, that would be helpful. And so a whole degree in 2 hours, we'll get it done, no problem. So we'll just be dipping our toes into a bunch of different areas, which I hope will inspire you to continue on to learn more. And I have quite a number of links for you, so you can go on and learn more in a variety of areas. And if you have particular questions, feel free to let me know what those are at the end, and then we can get a little bit deeper into areas that you have a particular interest in. So if you haven't figured out where the chat is, I want you to be able to find that, because we're going to use it in our training today. So if you don't know where the chat is, can you let us know? So that's the first thing. And if you have specific questions or needs, feel free to put them in the chat. And anything else before we start that you need to share? Okay, great. The other thing is you should be able to see my screen. We're screen sharing, and you should be able to see my initial slide, which is a picture of Yosemite in purple. So if you can't see that, let us know that as well in the chat, and we can take care of figuring out the details. Okay, so you've probably heard of interpretation, and it lives in a formal realm, but it also lives in an informal realm. And so formally, it is generally a guided walk, a guided talk, often with a large group, but sometimes a small group. And it's different than education, although it can be educational in nature. So education includes a group of people that are caught, right? They are there because they need to be there. And our audience is freely available to leave at any time, which is challenging, but also fun, because it requires us to have fun. It's just, sorry, it's part of your job. Because if you're not having fun, people don't generally want to stay. So it's fun to have a job that requires you to be playful. And it's really a crafted message with a very specific intent. And that intent is primarily to provide an opportunity for the visitor to connect what they're interested in with what is meaningful about your site. Let's see if we can get over to a PowerPoint here. We did our introductions. So does anybody have a, that wants to put into the chat what you understand interpretation to be or where it shows up? Go ahead and take a minute and write into the chat what is interpretation? Like, or what you understand it to be. Yeah, so yes, figuring out what your topic is and helping people connect to it. Nature nuggets that people remember on trivia night when they recount their vacation stories. Personal connections, emotional and intellectual. Somebody's been hanging out with NAI. Getting people to care about things they may not have otherwise. Getting people excited about some aspect of nature and while learning something new. Engaging your audience to make their own discoveries. Yeah, that autonomy is really important. Giving people the why they should care. Yeah, we'll talk about the why too. Awesome. Yes, 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 and yes. So I like to say it is, yeah, shared in a fun way, a communication process that helps people directly experience a place. It takes data from scientists or the facts of history, and it makes it relevant, engaging, and understandable. It's done in a way that connects the visitor's interests with the meanings and significance of the place. And I say place rather than resource because resource lands a little funny for me. Although resource is generally the word that's used in this case, connecting with the meanings and significance of the resource, but I prefer to say place or subject. And hopefully it provides a transformative opportunity for the visitor to feel, wonder, care, and connect. So that idea of transformation, we'll talk about a little bit later with Maslow's hierarchy, and it's a lofty goal. But the idea that something changes or shifts or a new perspective is seen in the visitor from what we do. So it's a pretty significant or meaningful goal that we have with interpretation. We want to provoke. That's a big word that comes from the history of interpretation. We want to compel and inspire. And I love this quote of Freeman Tilden, who did research early on in the 60s for the Park Service. Through interpretation, understanding, and through understanding, appreciation, and through appreciation, protection. So we have these desires to inspire people in what we share, but that inspiration is actually really meaningful, not only because the connections that are built between that which you're talking about, particularly wild space in this case, or cultural resources as well, but that connection is meaningful for people to reconnect with the wildness within themselves, and because that leads to protection, which is pretty crucial in a world today that has a lot of physical challenges to it. So what we're doing is serious work, really beautiful, meaningful work. And if you think about all the folks out there that are doing jobs that don't have a lot of meaning, how amazing that we get to be in a job, even if you're not doing interp as a primary job. You know, maybe you're selling books as a primary job, but you still get to connect with people that has an underlying really powerful meaning. That's pretty amazing, I think. So we're going to just touch briefly on the interpretive equation. And it shows up in Park Service literature about interpretation. It looks scary. If you hate math, don't worry about it. I was horrible at math. It's all just the idea that there are some key pieces that go into interpretation. You want to know your resource. You want to know your place. You want to have the information there. Very often when I was a field interpreter and I would do a program, I would research a ton of information and then narrow it down to a specific thing that I was talking about, but I had a lot of information around it so that if people got curious or wanted to know things, I could go into different areas and pull up information that was relevant. So we're not going to talk today about the knowledge of the resource, but do your work, do your study, go to the library, read books, use the internet, find out with valid sources, have strong information behind you when you share. And that credibility is meaningful for how your information is received from visitors. Next, you want to know your audience. We're going to talk a lot about knowing your audience today. And then you want to use appropriate techniques. And we'll talk about that as well. Techniques are this great tool to connect what you want to say with your audience in a fun way. And if you put those things together, hopefully you'll have an opportunity for people to make deeper connections on a variety of levels, often emotional or intellectual, with the message that you're sharing. So there's a link there. Later you can get that if you want to learn more about the interpretive equation. All right, so we talked about formal interpretation. Informal interpretation includes formal interpretation if you're going to use it in a certain way, but it also has more to it. So informal interpretation is the process of interacting one-on-one with an individual, generally a small group of visitors or one person or a family, and it's in a non-structured way where you are assessing what is the appropriate level of interaction that you're going to have with this group. So it may be at a visitor center, or you're on the phone answering questions, or you're at a cooperating association sales area, or you're roving in a forest, any situation that's not formal, and your expression, your character, your warmth, your patience are all helpful in figuring the situation out. So it's a lot easier in some ways to do formal interpretation because you go to a place and people meet you there and they know what to expect. And when you're in an informal situation, you're having to suss, right? You're having to figure out who are these folks and what do they need and what do I need to tell them? So there's some more subtlety within it. And people may come and they may not want you to have a monologue about something you're really excited about. So you have to kind of manage yourself too to figure out, you know, maybe you're super excited about something you just learned about and you've got to figure out what's going to be of interest to the visitor. So they say there's 3 levels of interactions you're going to have with visitors in this realm. And one is just orientation on the left of the screen, right? Orienting to place, location. Where is the bathroom? Where am I? What trails are here? Very often you're going to listen for where questions. How to get back to my car to the parking lot? Where is a hotel nearby here? Where's the trailhead? Often it's going to involve a map. Or maybe you're just going to see somebody looking hesitant and unsure when you're roving, you know, kind of looking around, or have their map and, you know, kind of trying to figure it out, where you're going to be like, okay, this is an orientation situation. I'm going to help them figure out what's happening. And sometimes each of these types of situations can build on each other. You can start with someone with orientation, but as they settle down and feel oriented, they might be interested to get more information. And after that, they might be interested in some interpretation. So you're feeling how far people are interested in going. Next, you've got information. So that's what questions. What do bears eat? It may be when questions. When do the stores close? It may be how questions. How did this place get formed? So some visitors may not start with those questions at all, but may be open to moving in that direction if you feel that out And you can kind of take people along this continuum from orientation through information and on towards interpretation. So interpretation, that last piece in this context, in an informal context, is getting to the meanings of the site. The why, as someone said earlier about what interpretation is. It's the why question. And people may be open and may have time for an interpretive experience. So it's this opportunity to take the basic information and get into what's the so what of it? Why does it matter? What's the meaning here? Like, what is really meaningful? And again, I'll come back to how many jobs do we get to continually return to the most meaningful question of why does this matter? What is most important here? It's really a profound honor to be in a position that all of us are in, or want to be in if you haven't gotten that job yet, to hold the deepest meaning of a place and be able to share it with visitors. So it may be that the deepest meaning is an intellectual one. You know, there are some visitors in particular that are very interested. They want to know all the facts. They want to know how tall things are and how big things are. And there is some wow and meaning in that, in the intellectual, oh, whoa, like Yosemite Falls is North America's tallest waterfall. Whoa, that's meaningful because, and then you can go into the why of why it is. And so there's insight and understanding in that intellectual connection, but it may be an emotional one. For me, I like the emotional stuff. I don't want to know the facts. I can't remember them half the time, but I do want to know why it matters emotionally. And so that's the empathy that I have, even if it's like the empathy for the experience of a pika during climate change and what they're suffering, what they're experiencing and challenged by, and what's a successful pika life like, or the surprise, you know, of learning about the awesomeness of there's a frog in Alaska that freezes solid over the winter time. Wow. And like, what must their world be like? That like touches me in a way, like survival. And it could be that for some people, a connection is made through a physical means. They develop a sense of comfort or awareness or safety in wild space. And that is a profound, meaningful connection for them, that I can, you know, start to trust my body maybe in a wild space if you're going on a walk with someone. And it could be in the area of transcendence, that there is an experience of awe or wonder or flow or rejuvenation that is profound. And maybe that doesn't even involve words. It doesn't always. It may be that you send somebody to a really special place and they go and see a phenomenal view, or they experience maybe animals rutting or flowers blooming or something really special, and they have almost an ineffable experience of awe. So you're just figuring out, you're looking and you're assessing how can I take people in that direction if they want to go? And those questions often start with why questions. Why are the trees dying? Why is this park protected? And it also may be head nodding and leaning forward, and follow-up questions and engagement that lead you in that direction of, oh, okay, folks are interested in going deeper with me. Any questions so far in the chat you want to put in, just to check in on you? Okay. So to do that visitor assessment, they're doing it of us and we're doing it of them, right? We're checking each other out. As living beings, we are always checking each other out, figuring out where am I, what's happening, who are you? We're assessing for I see that question. We're assessing for safety. We're assessing for approachability. And these assessments are mostly unconscious. When we meet somebody new, there's a ton of things that we are going over in our mind to figure out who they are and where we stand. And I'll just pause and say, I see the question, how would you go from the largest waterfall info to emotional connections? So I might, with Yosemite Falls in Yosemite Valley, there is, for me, some awe around why this waterfall is so big. Why is this one waterfall so big and so many other waterfalls aren't? Which links to this whole bigger story about how tectonic plates, about the Earth's crust, about how geologic time and the scale of it, and how these variety of factors have come together to make this one waterfall be so big. So there, for me, there's awe in the kind of the happenstance of magic that all came together in this one place to turn out this one way. And the scale is awesome to me of time. And so those are some of the words, and we'll get into emotional connections and how you make them. Some words I might use to talk about the waterfall. Awe and like the rareness of a variety of factors that ended up right here in this place in this time with this landscape. Okay, so back to visitor assessments. So when you meet someone new, what kinds of things are you sussing out to figure out who they are? So for example, you're probably looking at how they do their grooming and what clothes they're wearing. What other things physically in a person are you sussing out to figure out who they are? What are you noticing about a new person that you meet? Go ahead and write it in the chat. Do they have children with them? Do I know what country they're from? How comfortable are they outside? Who are they with? And are they within 6 feet of them, and are they wearing masks? How old are they? What shoes are they wearing? I love it. Maybe how clean they are. Who's their friends group? How mobile are they, like physically? How do they mingle? The way they dress. What tone of voice are they using? What's their posture? Why are they out there? What logos do they have on their shirt? What type of recreation do they like? What kind of eye contact are they making with me? What kind of recreation do they like by what gear they have? Do they have binoculars? Do they have climbing shoes on? What language are they using? Awesome. So we have all these things that are bubbling up, right? And then we automatically assign categories based on race, gender, class, and age. I mean, that just happens. That happens to us. And they are doing it with us too, right? So there's an awareness of, what am I projecting to you? Are my clothes pressed? Is my hair done? Am I using respectful language? All of that is how we relate to one another. And there's this next layer, the questions they ask. Yeah, so then there's this next layer of, what are our feelings about that person? In categories such as attitude, what's their attitude? What's their competence? What are their intentions? How safe are they or trustworthy in relating to me or going out into the wilderness? How much respect is there in our relationship? What is their perspective? How warm are they? And we can use all of these things, if we are aware of them, to make informed guesses about where people are coming from, what they might be feeling or needing, and what we may be able to offer. All right, so we'll stay there for a minute. So there's one word I want to say about these assessments. They are important in helping us know if they have binoculars, they might be a birder. That's a good place to go. If they've got a climbing rope, they might be wanting to talk about climbing. Those are useful. And there's a lot of unconscious bias that we have built into our culture that's going to show up when we're making those assessments. So it's important to know that and have that be helpful in recognizing where it shows up, because the unconscious bias that shows up can hinder our ability to connect with a person as they truly are, because we're bringing in assumptions that may be wrong. So it's this funny line where it's useful to recognize we make those assumptions. We do it anyway. It's good to notice it, and we have to be very careful that the assumptions may be wrong, and they may take us in directions that assume things that are unfair towards the people that we're relating to. And so that's a whole world that we're not going to talk about today, about unconscious bias. And I have a link to some good resources for you after this talk. And I recommend that you spend time, if you haven't, that we actually have a moral responsibility as interpreters relating to others and in a position of authority. Even if you're not in a ranger uniform, even if you're in a partner uniform or a volunteer uniform, once we are representatives of an organization, we are in a position of authority in these lands that we're on, and that we have some responsibility to tend to our own unconscious bias. So some great resources for digging into that, figuring out where common unconscious bias lies, and making sure that that doesn't get in the way of our relating to others. I'd love to do more on that, but we'll just move on from there. Any questions? Okay. So now we get to Maslow's hierarchy. So Maslow was a psychologist that did some work around what human needs are, what are basic human needs. And the way it has been taught for a long time is that it is in a hierarchy that starts with basic needs and moves up, but it's not always that way. It's often that way, but not always. We're going to not spend a lot of time here, but we'll go through his hierarchy. Maslow, there we go. So basic needs, Maslow says, first, physiological needs. So do we have enough rest? Have we peed lately? You know, you can be at a really engaging talk, but if you have to pee, as Jennifer says, first you pee, then you see. If you have to pee, that's going to take precedence. So your physiological needs, quite important and often first. Safety is going to show up as a really early need as well when people are showing up at your site. You know, what is dangerous here? Bears often in Yosemite are one that comes up early around safety. Am I going to get lost? How do I get back to my car? Security kind of falls into that same realm. How can I make sure that I am secure in this place? Is anything going to sneak up and bite me? What are the dangerous insects and snakes? And then once people's basic needs are settled, very often they can move towards these intermediate needs. So love and belonging may show up like when they arrive, are you making eye contact with them and being warm with them? Are they being noticed? Are they being recognized? This is where like unconscious bias can show up, where people of color often are not recognized or acknowledged or taken care of as soon as people that are white. So like, are people included? Are we including them actively? And then esteem. So I'm going to ask a scary question. Undoubtedly, it's showing up in this class right now, where it's scary to ask a question or make a comment on the chat because you don't want to look dumb, right? And so you don't know if it's a good question, and your esteem is important. You want to know that it feels safe to do that. So as your instructor, I'm really tending to, I want to make a safe space for you so that you can feel comfortable to ask questions or to step forward. And I want to acknowledge the responses that you give me so that you feel heard and seen. And then just knowledge, I want to know stuff, right? So you can start really learning once you feel safe and comfortable. And then the last or highest piece are these growth needs of understanding, like, the aha moment, aesthetics, like I feel good, feel comfortable, and show me the beauty. Like, where can I go to see beautiful things? And then self-actualization. So like, that's the aha, that's the transcendence. That is feeling so small when you're looking at the night sky. Or feeling so powerful when you cross a ski slope, or you cross a creek, or you navigate to your destination and back with your map and compass. It's like, wow, the awe. Or just seeing a really, like, dropping into the most amazing butterfly coming out of its chrysalis, and your mind is blown. So one of the cool things about interpretation is, of all the jobs in the parks and public lands, forests, a lot of the jobs are very specific. If you are doing maintenance, you are working in like safety, security land to keep people safe, or maybe you are cleaning bathrooms and you're working at the physiological level. But we as interpreters are working at all the levels. We are helping people top to bottom for what human needs are. And we have the opportunity in our work sometimes to have these moments that go towards transcendence, that just go towards wow, or a connection that's powerful. Yay for interpretation. I'm highly biased towards it, if you can tell. Okay, so those are some of the needs, and we'll come back to this idea of needs. In fact, we'll kind of meditate on it right now. So before we get to kind of exploring visitor needs, I will say reading, actually I'll come back to it right now so we can look at it. Reading your audience and visitor cues is a really fundamental part of informal interpretation. And it's this observation and informed guesses to make a guess of what are our visitors feeling and where on this hierarchy are they. They say most of our communication is through body language. So we're actually getting a lot consciously and unconsciously just by looking at how people are behaving to kind of take a guess at where people are on this list. So some of that body language may look like, well, let me ask you. So you have a visitor, you're seeing interest in their physical behavior, you're seeing interest, and you're guessing that they are excited about whatever need you're meeting at this moment with them. What possible positive cues are you getting for interest, for paying attention, for being calm and comfortable with you? What kinds of physical cues do you see in visitors that tell you, yes, I'm on the right track, and this visitor's needs are getting met? Put it in the chat. Yes, eye contact, absolutely. Asking questions, smiling, nodding, leaning in, getting close, except for COVID, darn it all. Yeah. Relaxed arms, hands open, dilated pupils, nodding. Yeah. Remaining still and not fidgeting or like glancing away. And what are negative cues that you're like, ooh, their needs are not getting met right now? What physical demonstration do you have of that with body language? Restlessness, distancing, staring, like checking out maybe. Yeah, glancing away. Side conversations, sighing, oh, it hurts, it hurts. Raising their voice, interrupting, ooh, walking away, ouch, ouch. Kids pulling something, maybe. Yawning. Lester, I didn't pulling away. Okay, yeah, yes. Parents are like, here, come do this fun activity. Kids don't want to do it. Rolling their eyes. Yes, arms crossed. Twisting their lips or pursing their lips. Frowning, fast blinking, tapping or fidgeting, fiddling with things, yawning, slouching. Yeah, arguing. Ouch, ouch, it hurts, it hurts. Interrupting. Yeah, so we're like doing all this assessment, right? And it's really useful checking the time. You know, we can go on autopilot asking for the forest supervisor's phone number. Yikes. Yeah, so we can go on autopilot and do our jobs, but if we clue into consciousness around all of these cues, we're using them for this really subtle art of where are they at and where can I move towards, what areas do they want me to move towards that will be of value to them and to me. So yeah, and helpful information is in the voice too, in pitch and tone, inflection and volume. And this brings up the idea of the visitor is sovereign. In other words, they are the boss of themselves. They get to be where they're at, and they get to want what they want. So we have our goals, our interests of what we want for them, and they just get to be where they're at and we get to honor it. Interpretation is interpretorture if it's not wanted. So this is a really important part of our process, is figuring out where people are. And when they ask questions, are they asking for orientation, information, interpretation, and meeting these needs on the hierarchy? It could be that they start somewhere, you answer, but you can see in their body language, they're still there with you. You can maybe take them to the next step. You know, sometimes someone will ask, when was Yosemite protected? And the Yosemite story is kind of this crazy 3-part, multi-layered story. But I can say, oh, you know, it's actually a big story. The national park was created in 1890. It wasn't the first national park, but it was really important because of its long history in the American conservation movement. Have you heard the story? And I'm going to get that body language to say, oh gosh, way too much. Like, I just wanted 1890, thank you. Or like, no, I didn't know. And then, okay, now we can start going down the trail of like, why is Yosemite this complicated story and what does it mean in the history of conservation? Those clues are also useful for when somebody is done. It's funny, I'm just going to scroll down for fun. So most people that are on the call today you're not on your cameras, which is fine. But it's such a funny thing to be in this Zoom environment, right? Because I am looking at my notes and at the PowerPoint, and so I'm not looking at your faces. But generally, I'm really paying attention to see when, okay, move on, or when there's questions or you're puzzled. Yeah, and so Lester says, how do you deal with one person who checks out, but others are still interested? And there is kind of a group, well, first of all, there is a group process, right? So I don't know if those of you that have done programs before have noticed, there are times when your group just solidifies and like one person is laughing and maybe it inspires other people to find you funny. And then you're like the funniest thing that ever happened. And you just have this amazing program all the way through and people are super inspired or super amused, or really just it's a positive interaction. And there is kind of a group think that happens. And you can't meet everyone's individual needs all the time, especially when you have a larger group. So if you've got a family and one person's kind of checked out, I would be willing to take the time to just check in with them in a gentle way to see maybe ask a question that's a little curious to see where they're at. And if I have a large group, I have to accept that some people are going to not be interested and others will be. And what is the bulk of the group telling me with their face and body language? Are they with me or not? So sometimes I'll let somebody go. And like the visitor is sovereign, like you have a right to be bored too. That's okay. Like not be interested in what I have to say. I accept that. At some point, I would love to hear your experience dealing with frustration or discouragement you could feel working in a position like you do. Any tips? That's an interesting question, and hold it, bring it back to me at the end. And we can maybe talk about it then. Okay, so so part of this process with human needs is the pairing of the feelings, because our feelings are messages to us that are telling us which of these needs we're getting met or not met. And so when you see a feeling show up in somebody, it's going to give you a good sense of where they're at. So for example, the classic question is, are there bears here? Could mean a lot of things, right? So is that question, are there bears here because I love bears and I like totally want to see one and take a photo and I have a photo collection of all the bears I've ever seen? Or is it, I'm terrified of bears and I want to avoid them at all costs? Or, I mean, who knows what it is, but you can see in the, what's the feeling behind that question? Am I safe? Or can you tell me more? So feeling is also a key piece to this. So we've got like, that's the visitor. It's our own feelings that we're trying to track to see how we can best effectively relate to others. And then there's sight needs as well, right? So we have to balance, I'm having a bad day, this visitor wants too much of my time, and they're doing a behavior that I'm not super psyched about or that has risk involved. Or maybe the visitor wants to take off, but there's a safety message that I want to get to them. Maybe even in the time of COVID, they have a visitor about, or they have a question about something benign, but they are not wearing a mask and they're too close to my body. Well, then there is this extra need that's showing up around my safety or park safety. So you're balancing all of those. And of course, the priority has to be on those basic needs for your site as well, right? So safety concerns. And it may require that you have to give a firm directive statement or a warning. If somebody's out in the middle of the road and a car is coming, that just trumps all things, right? So, and there's additional pieces at play with mobility, with hearing, vision, language, which are also could be in effect to inhibiting your communication with someone or safety issues. So just being aware of those layers of someone is really interested in a flower, but they're walking into a place that's very fragile and stepping on the plant, you might have to catch that first before you can figure out if we're doing orientation, information, or interpretation. That's just an important piece to add. And that you kind of have to work with your own, what are my feelings coming up right now? So when there's a safety issue at play, I might say, what a jerk. I can't believe they're stopping traffic, right? In Yosemite, it's frequent. People stop their cars in the middle of a one-lane road, open the car door and wander out and start taking photos. And it may be a beautiful view or it may be a bear or whatever it is, but like, this is actually a traffic concern. It's a safety concern for your body. And I may need to tend to myself for a minute, be like, okay, it's all right, we're okay. And wow, I have this really strong feeling that I need to express. And I try to get into where they're at. Like, wow, it must be so amazing, this view that caught you so much you had to stop your car. And there's this very serious concern we need to address, which is the traffic and your own safety. Would you mind getting back in your car and pulling over at the next pullout or walking back to this place? So yeah, you want to dance with all those things held with honor, what your site needs, what your visitor needs, and what you are feeling as well. Okay, feel free to type questions if you have them in the chat box. So we talked about, have you ever seen a bear? That's another way that question may come up. Have you ever seen a bear? Which sounds like it is take me to interpretation, right? Or like tell me a story. But it may be that really the need behind that is I feel unsafe. And I don't know how to say I feel unsafe. So I'm going to say, have you ever seen a bear? But really, I want to know, am I safe here? And what do I need to do to stay safe? So even a question on its surface, you kind of want to suss out as you start to answer it or ask more questions in relationship to it. And it may be they ask you, have you ever seen a bear? But really, they want to tell you their bear story, and they're figuring out a way to open the door so they can. So all of that is a feeling it out. Okay. Okay, so here we have a scenario. You're walking down the trail, and a visitor asks, how big is the lake? Put in the chat box what you think their needs might be. So how big is the lake is the question, and I'll take you back to Maslow's hierarchy. Put in the chat box what needs might be asked, or what needs might be underneath the question, how big is the lake? So maybe they want a boat. They want to know how long the trail is. Is the walk worth it? Maybe they want to swim across, just to have knowledge. Yeah, they want to hike around. Can they swim across? So some of it is some knowledge. Maybe you're on a walk, and so how far are we going to walk? So it's around like physiology, comfort, safety. Maybe they just want to connect with you. Absolutely. Yeah, like exploration. They're curious. They want to know how far they can go. Security, knowledge, understanding. Yeah. To find out what I know. Yeah, maybe they want to assess your credibility as a person to talk to. And yes, there's some intellectual, some knowledge stuff. They want to compare it to Lake Tahoe. Awesome. You get it. Okay. How close will I have to watch my inquisitive children by the water's edge? So a safety question. Yeah. So now we're passing by a couple on a bench, canoodling, which is like totally into each other. And beside them is this beautiful insect that you see as you're going by. They don't look up as you pass by. Someone says, you just shout, hello. What needs do they have in this moment? Physical. Yeah. Security, privacy, love and belonging, maybe with their key person. What needs do you have when you see this beautiful insect? You want to share. Yeah, let me go back. What needs do you have? You want to respect their needs. They might want to identify the insect, or you might want to. You want them to have the aha moment, right? You're like, this is really cool. This is an opportunity. It's an aha moment for me. I really like this insect. And they have these other needs, right? They're in their own zone. So do you interrupt them to tell them about the insect? Are you in uniform? You're in uniform. You are. You interrupt them and point out the beautiful insect beside their picnic bench or their whatever, their bench. No, Lester says you don't interrupt them. What do y'all think? Nope. Yeah, probably not. Let them have their privacy. Yeah. So they've got their own needs. They've got their own set of needs. And the insect can go, but you really want to honor where they are at. It depends on how close they are to the insect, right? And how dangerous it is. Okay, there might be a safety thing that comes in there for sure. Yeah, don't squish it. Yeah, that's true. I have a need to be annoying. Well, yeah, sometimes. That's like really, but it's really not to be annoying, right? Like the need is to share or to be seen or to connect for you. And it may come across as annoying for people, but that's not what the need is. The need is something really beautiful. Yeah, but we've just got to manage that to honor where other people are at. Okay, so now we've got a large Spanish-speaking group at a picnic area, and their food is unattended. What needs are they experiencing? So for them, what needs are getting met in having this picnic? So we might be coming at them with education or security or safety. But yeah, so enjoyment is one of the needs that they're getting met. You know, they're with their community or with their family, so they've got play and connection and ease, recreation, belonging, family time. Yeah. And we're coming at this situation, love and belonging. Yeah. So they're having all these needs met by this experience. And we walk up and food is unattended and it's in a bear zone. Of course, I'm coming from Yosemite world where this is a common thing. So another layer, and maybe people were getting at this when talking about safety and security earlier, is that the uniform for some Spanish-speaking communities is a little scary because the differentiation between immigration and park ranger is not necessarily there. And I'm a little intimidating in my uniform. So when I walk up and I have an interest in keeping our bears safe, there's another layer there of do they feel safe with me in their space? So all those things are happening simultaneously, right? You're sussing that out. I have strong needs and my site has strong needs for safety and security for bears and for proper behavior. I really want people to follow the rules so that our bears stay safe. But I need to be sensitive to what needs they're trying to get met right now, which is not having a ranger lecture them, and that I might be a little uncomfortable in my uniform. And so can I come forward in a way that is gentle, in a way that honors where their needs are before I get to sharing what I want to share. Awesome. Yeah, and if you can speak Spanish, all the better. It is a bridge, absolutely. Okay, so how do we make a connection with people? How now you're out there in your forest and you want to catch somebody's attention. It can be daunting, it can be awkward to start up a conversation. Maybe you're roving, right? So you are wandering the trail with the intention of having positive visitor interactions. What are some ways that you start that relationship with people? Go ahead and write in the chat. Yeah, what about the language barrier? What do you do if you don't speak Spanish? Back to that Spanish group. I mean, sometimes if there's a full language barrier, you can't have that conversation and you need to go back and find somebody that can. Sometimes you just don't have it. And learning new languages is a wonderful thing to do. Okay, so back to how do we start conversations with people? Open-ended questions, a wave, hola, or not necessarily a Spanish-speaking group, but a English-speaking group either. Body language, eye contact, smiling. Tell people to have a good day. Find common ground. But starting that whole, you can find common ground, but you got to start, right? So the wave is good. Maybe they wave back, but then they ignore you. Then what do? You can introduce yourself. Yeah. And in that introduction, then you're checking to see eye contact. Is it maintained, right? Mention something interesting at the site. Absolutely. It's nice to have a hook So what's that hook? Maybe it is you have a really cool skull or a really cool fur or something cool in your hand. Often you can hook the kids. So like, hey, check this out. Stickers to hand out, awesome. Have you been here before? Ask if it's your first time visiting. Yeah. Swag, yep, giveaways. Maybe it's a question, right? Have you all seen any wildlife today? Or what's been the best part of the day? Have you seen any interesting fill in the blank today? What have you seen? Yeah, exactly. Or maybe it's just like a friendly observation. You found a comfortable space. That's awesome. Or I noticed you have binoculars. Do you bird? Try neutral observations that don't feel judgmental. Or open-ended questions. Where are you from? What had you come to this place today? Yeah, and then props are awesome. Any guesses where this came from, or have you ever seen this before? What do you notice about this cool thing that I have? Or a did you know might be fun. You know, you have a provocative statement or a gee whiz fact or a compelling question. Any guess what the #1 animal killer of humans in Yosemite is? Just like a fun fact. Does anybody know what the animal killer is? What animal has killed people in Yosemite? Wasps, people, that's true. It's deer, by the way. Bears haven't killed anybody in Yosemite. Cool, so yeah, figuring out that initial and being brave about it, that initial step forward where you catch somebody's attention, that's where you can start the positive ball rolling, getting from orientation to information to interpretation. Okay, we are right on time. Woo! So now we're going to kind of switch from that initial how do you suss people out and how do you start and how do you make contact to where do you go with that? What does informal interpretation look like when you're at your desk or when you are on the trail? So before we do that, I'm going to give you, it's 10 a.m. my time. I'm going to give you a 5-minute break just to like run to the bathroom or stand up and stretch. So take a little 5-minute break and then we'll come back at 10:05 and get into how do you engage with informal interpretation at your site. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box while we have a 5-minute break. Ready, go. And you can come on and talk to me directly too if you would like to. Questions while we're breaking? Is P. Kushner around right now that asked a question about frustration and discouragement? Lester, it's an interesting question. I am now Googling, out of curiosity, conservation education, which I'm not familiar with. Randy, if you scroll up to the top of the chat, maybe if you came in later, you don't see the full top of the chat. But a lot of people introduced themselves and said where they were from. I can go back and let you know that if you can't see it. Then I am not in Yosemite Valley, although this woodsy cabin behind me would make you think that I am, but I'm actually working remotely from my house in Pacifica, California. I'm at the beach. So Lester, are you there? And I can answer your question about conservation education. You can turn off your mute and say hi if you want to. Okay, I will not answer that question right now. Kelly, what do I like best about working in Yosemite? So much that I love about working in Yosemite. So one is that I get to do what I love. So I'm a sign language interpreter and I'm a naturalist interpreter, and I get to do them both. And I get to do what's most meaningful for me. So that's really powerful. Yosemite is, I don't know if you've been there, but it's amazingly profoundly beautiful and like spiritually inspiring, transformative. So just being in that place is very healing and restful and delightful. And interpretation is just one of my favorite things. Sharing with people about what matters and what's inspiring and playing with people is so fun. So those are some things that I love. Go back to the questions. Oh, Carl shared about coming up with a mother and daughter, and the daughter had a huge fistful of wildflowers. And instead of trying to first connect, I launched straight into trying to get them to stop. I totally get it. I totally get it. It's easy to do. And depending, it may feel really immediate. And yeah, if you can start with where people are and honoring what they are trying to do, what needs they're trying to get met, it can help to make a connection so that people can actually hear you. Okay, good. Angie, thanks for letting me know. Okay, we are going to start back up. Hopefully people are here. Get refocused, everybody, because we're headed back in. Okay. So informal interpretation, you're going to take people from orientation or from information, and you're going to take them into this place of meaning. How do you do that? How do you get there? It is informal, it's unstructured, but it does require some preparation. And part of that is using some of the tools of interpretation to use. So informal thematic interpretation is about what matters. So you can create a handful of themes, and we'll talk about what themes are, to pull out of your pocket on key issues. The themes are the most meaningful thing that you want to say, and you can actually figure those out in advance. And then you bring them along with you. So once you figure that out, you have them in your back pocket, and you can be like, what theme would this conversation relate to? So the parts of interpretation, some key pieces are tangibles intangibles, themes, main points, and appropriate techniques. And we're going to go through each of those and talk about how they have context in more of a job, what you're doing, not necessarily in an hour-long presentation in an amphitheater, but how you can use these same tools in a situation where visitors are passing by. Okay, so let's start with tangibles. So tangibles are physical things, all the physical things around you. The bears, the pines, storms, visitors, streams, trails, land grants, waterfalls, insects, trash, granite, park protectors, native peoples, historic buildings, Euro settlers, all of the physical things. And your meaningful messages, your themes, are going to come out of taking something tangible as well as something intangible. So like I said, I love emotional connections. I love intangible ideas and meaning and significance. But if I do too much interpretation, if I do too much communication with people, and I stay in the realm of intangibles, of meaning and ideas, people start to feel spacey. Like, what are we talking about? What does this have to do with where we are right now? So tangibles keep us grounded and keep what we're talking about to be relevant to the physical site that we are at. So when you build a theme, you're going to take a tangible and an intangible and put them together. You got to start with the physical things. Intangibles are the meanings. Human needs, that list of Maslow's needs, fit into this list of intangible things. Could be survival, hope or despair, love or hate, life, death, attraction, comfort, adventure, sacrifice, harmony, dignity, shame, challenge, understanding, strength, longevity, creativity, inclusion. The list is long, but intangibles are the things we can't touch. And each physical thing in our landscape, or the landscape itself, is a representation of one of these intangibles, or many of them. And that is in your body. You can feel it. When you look at a thing and you say, what does this mean? What does this represent? You start to get these ideas. And these meanings, they have emotional resonance in us. And when you share an idea, and this has been shown by interpretive research, if you watch that pre-study video about Sam Hamm's book of interpretation, Sam Hamm has done a lot of research with interp in the parks. When you give a message that has emotional resonance for people, it is better retained and it's more meaningful. It's longer retained for people. We encode memory with an emotional layer. We just exist in an emotional world. And because those emotions, like I said, are connecting to human needs, and they're the basis of life for us. So finding out what is that meaning for that particular thing you're talking about, take something that is informational and moves it towards interpretation. It moves it towards connection and meaning. Questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Okay, so take a minute, look at this picture. If you aren't familiar with what you're seeing, this is a Yosemite hillside filled with dead trees because of bark beetles. And the bark beetles are preying upon trees in Yosemite because the climate is changing and we're having a drought. And the combination of the like 1-2 punch of climate, drought, and then these stressed trees that beetles, which are native, are hitting on. These trees, we've had massive amounts of tree death, and I know that's been the case in much of the Sierra Nevada. So I picked something that hopefully would touch on something that you are familiar with as well. Feel free to write in the chat if you feel like I still have no idea what we're looking at. but take a minute and tell me what tangibles or physical things are you seeing in this image that you could talk about? What tangible things are related to pines, bark beetles? This photo was a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago. Dead trees, dying trees, red needles. Oaks is a tangible thing. Those oaks are still surviving, it's true. What other physical things are related to this story? Old growth and new growth. Fire, mountains, living trees. Yeah, the types of trees that are there. Mortality is kind of a intangible thing, but yeah, trees, fires, beetles, yeah, the beetles themselves. I think of the logging companies and the contracts with logging companies to take some of these trees out. The watershed, drainage, power line corridors, habitat. Yeah, habitat is kind of both tangible and intangible. View sheds are not really tangible, but they're kind of sort of in that realm for, yeah, what we can see as we take these trees out, and then how it's opening up Yosemite Valley, for example. The birds, particularly insectivorous birds that are eating bark beetles and bark beetle larvae happily now. The galleries that the beetles make, another tangible thing. Awesome. And what, past mega droughts, yeah, what intangible things comes up when you think about this story? So what meanings or significance does this arise in you? So I'll give you an example. When I think about it, disappointment, loss, change, loss of beauty, fear of wildfire, apocalypse, sadness, overwhelm, problems. Yeah, there's some like happiness for the insectivorous birds that are getting to eat. There's some relief because Yosemite's forest has been really dense, overly dense, unnaturally dense, because we've been suppressing fires. So there's some like relief because there's some clearing of the forest. Death, renewal. Yeah, there's discomfort with visitors that see trees getting logged and don't understand why we're logging in Yosemite. Change and future change. Insignificance of my role. What can I do? Adaptation. Death and renewal. Awesome. Yeah. So while you're thinking about that, you know, it may be that I know danger, the logging company is a tangible. Yeah, it may be that I know that visitors are going to come and ask about this. Most of these trees have lost their leaves now. This was a few years ago. And so now you don't see them as much anymore. It's not as striking. So visitors aren't asking quite as much. But there's a lot of logging going on in the valley. So it's a common question that people ask about these trees. So I know it's of interest to the visitors. It's an opportunity to talk about climate change, which is meaningful for the park. And for me personally, I want people to know about it, and I want people to have consciousness around it. So I'm interested for that reason. If the trees have lost leaves, people from the east may not see the same thing. Interesting. Yeah, so what's the relevance for the visitor? Are they coming from a place that has bark beetles? What's their relationship to climate change at their own park, and what is here? Risk, need for evacuation route. Awesome. Yeah, so all these things are in my mind, but I'm like, okay, this is a meaningful story for the visitor. It's important for the park story. It's an opportunity to talk about interrelationships and intercommunication between beetles and trees and mycorrhizal fungi. So there's a lot going on in the story that's rich for me. So great, this is a great start. I could write now a theme on this topic. So the topic is bark beetles or tree death. That's like the simple idea. I could write a theme that includes a tangible and an intangible that is in one single sentence that has, what's the point? What's the takeaway? I want people to, if I could say everything I wanted to say in one sentence about bark beetles, or that's all the time people had for it. You know, it's like the headline of my interpretive sign if I'm writing one on a wayside. Or I get to say one sentence to people as they walk by. What's the most meaningful thing that I want to say, that theme? And I put that in my back pocket. So now if I get a tree question, I can link it back to, oh, I have a meaningful thing to say about this. And then it's a game of how do I get people from where they are to get to this theme. So let's do it. So give me what's the most significant. Maybe I'll pick a tangible for you and say bark beetles is our tangible. And if you have a scratch paper, this would be helpful. What is an intangible, like the most impactful intangible that we wrote up, or a new one that comes up to you that you would want to say that bark beetles represent? The most important intangible that would be, if you could like only tell people one thing, what is it about bark beetles? Bark beetles are what? They're a symbol for death, change. So it is true, death, and death is very powerful for people, but it's not necessarily a message people want to walk away with when they're on vacation. So you got to, like, the negative ones you got to kind of dance with. Part of the okay, so web of life. What do you want to tell people? If you could tell people one thing about bark beetles and the change of the landscape in the Sierra Nevada due to climate change and to drought and to these beetles, what do you want people to know or walk away with? Nothing is wasted. Interesting. Okay. I don't know what the intangible word would be for nothing is wasted, but yeah. What do you want people to know? What matters about it? Imbalance. Okay, so there's this idea of balance and imbalance. And that we can have an effect. Yeah. Okay, and that climate change, that's an interesting one too, that climate change is noticeable right here, right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then there's the whole fire piece, right? So we could get into fire. Yeah, right, because it's the part of the story is that these trees are so dense because we haven't burned, and so you could use it as an opportunity to educate about fire and what we've done and haven't done. Aren't they invasive? The beetle's not invasive, no. This could point out a very real tangible effect of the consequences of not practicing environmental safety. It's true, there is a whole thing we could go about invasives and non-invasives, but the bark beetles, at least in the Yosemite region, are native. Carbon footprint, millions of trees or millions of beetles. Interrelationships. Yeah, so if you say, let's say we pick this idea of the web of life, right? So I have a bias, I love that one. So if your tangible is bark beetles and your intangible is the web of life, what is that one sentence that could put those two things together to be a meaningful idea about bark beetles and the web of life? So if you've got a scratch paper, it's helpful. Write down bark beetles, web of life, and start thinking about what is this sentence? How could I put that into one meaningful sentence? Janet says everything is connected to something else. Thank you, John Muir. altered ecosystems are leading to an explosion of bark beetles. Yeah, yeah. There are consequences for our actions. Yes, these are all super meaningful ideas, and we want to capture them and then figure out a way to put it into one sentence that has bark beetles and the web of life, or at least the idea of the web of life. You know, it's maybe that bark beetles are a symbol. Or like the web of life gives me ideas about how everything's put together, which gives me like thinking of analogies around many things interconnected. And could you think of an analogy of something else that has lots of interconnected pieces, and how bark beetles are one piece of that. And maybe you could use that as how can driving a car influence the forest? Exactly what that means. The web of life is responding to our denial. Interesting. Bark beetles are a response. Bark beetles are a response to our actions. Bark beetles are a response of the web of life to our actions. An example of how the web of life can be affected by climate change and our response. Yeah, we were just about on the same page there. The bark beetles are an example of how the web of life can be affected by climate change and our response. So affected, affected is like, we could maybe make that word a little more powerful. Bark beetle, my sentence was, bark beetles are a response of the web of life to our actions. So even response maybe is not powerful enough word. Playing with, because so once you get your tangible and your intangible, you can start honing in on each of the words and finding what is the most like succinct and powerful way to say this sentence. And it feels like a lot of effort for one sentence, but this is going to be like your guiding light when you are communicating, and you can do this work with a number of different meaningful, maybe a handful, maybe 5 meaningful messages, and then you can carry these messages with you. We mobilize an army of bark beetles by not listening to the signs and symptoms of global climate change. Imbalance isn't the fault of the bark beetle. They are responding to the climate changes. Interesting. So imbalance is your intangible there. Interesting. Bark beetles are showing us how fragile the web of life can be. Wow, fragility. That has a lot of power for me when I read that one. Yeah, like I like the word fragility. It has emotional resonance. Example of our human influence. Bark beetles are an example. So example has more of a like education feel. Symbol maybe. Feels a little stronger. Yeah, of our human influence. But influence, yeah, impact is maybe even a stronger word than influence. Yeah, imbalance isn't the fault of the bark beetle. They are responding to the climate changes. Yeah. So thinking about your sentence, Anne, imbalance isn't the fault of the bark beetle. They are responding to the climate changes. That seems to be in response to, like, maybe we're blaming the bark beetle, but you don't want to blame them, which is an interesting idea, like taking people to who do we blame and why, and like stepping back to see big picture. Bark beetles have been here for a long time as an important piece of the web of life, but are now becoming more visible, but to environmental imbalance. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's just figuring out what is the most, and so maybe web of life is like, is good, but doesn't have the emotional power of what do bark, yes, this is a good question. What do bark beetles say about the web of life? Is it Is it about, like, so that comes back to fragility, that bubbles up from an earlier one about fragility. And the web of life then kind of is another tangible, right? So bark beetles and the web of life can serve as tangibles, and then fragility is the idea of the intangible in between. Yeah, so do you see we're just like workshopping in this weird Zoom circumstance where only I get to talk, but you get to write messages. But that's part of the work of theme building. It takes time. It's a slow process of like turning over what's most meaningful, what's most impactful. Bark beetles tell us just how much climate change and our actions can influence the health of the web of life.
Yep.
Yeah. And then can you play with like, can you start playing with words? Like bark beetles have wings, so you could do fly, or you could do, I don't know, just thinking about word plays to switch out some of the words to make it be catchy. Yeah, so checks and balances, yeah. Yeah, all these good ideas, and we're kind of like circling around. Something small as a bark beetle can change the balance of the, ooh. This show, yeah, bark beetles, or like something, maybe just something as small as a bark beetle can change the balance of the web of life. Ooh, I really like that one. Something as small as a bark beetle. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to steal that one. We'll pause us. Can change the balance of the web of life. So, right, there's not like a right or a wrong answer in writing themes. I have my own opinions, but lots of other people do. The intangibles are going to strike different people in different ways. So it's good to workshop with other people, and it's good to test it out on others and feel it out, and give yourself time to build them and think about them and turn them over. But I think for our purposes today, something as small as a bark beetle can change the balance of life, or change the balance of the web of life, is classic interp theme. Love it. Bark beetle is your tangible. Balance, the idea of balance, and certainly in a time of COVID when we're reassessing what balance looks like, balance has some emotional resonance for me. And the web of life is such a meaningful idea. It may or may not have meaning for visitors. They may not have come upon that idea, or it may be old hat. You do environmental education, web of life is like environmental EE 101. But it's a great example. Something as small as a bark beetle can change the balance of the web of life. Okay, so we're going to put a pin in that for now. That is the process of workshopping, what it might look like. It's a single sentence with a tangible and an intangible, and the so what message about what you want to tell visitors. So that takeaway of, I love something as small as a bark beetle, right? Because it's many bark beetles in cooperation together that are changing what the landscape of the Sierra Nevada forest look like, but how easy is it to transition to each of us individuals as humans, and how we work collectively to make change around climate change. Easy to go there. So yeah, that has a lot of resonance for me. Okay, so I brought out some interpretive theme examples just to give you a sense of some other ones. Yosemite's native peoples tended wild gardens of abundance for generations. Plants pay insects to deliver love letters to their sweethearts. Preserving biodiversity is a life insurance policy for humans. Average people can change history in miraculous ways. Black bears and humans are in an endless creativity contest with food storage in the park. Stormwater has Lake Tahoe fighting for survival. Wilderness is a priceless place for us to remember we belong to the animal kingdom. So each of these sentences has a tangible Yosemite's native peoples, for example. Wild gardens is another tangible. And then there's tending and abundance in there as intangibles. Or the second one, plants and insects and love letters and sweethearts are all tangibles. And this idea of payment and delivery is just a playful one. Preserving biodiversity is a life insurance policy. So preservation is our intangible there. Biodiversity is kind of a tangible, intangible. We can get a little squirrely with what fits in what category, but life insurance policy and humans are tangible. So as you think about what are the questions you're getting at your job site, what are the important messages of your park? What is important for you personally for people to know? You're putting all those pieces together to say, what are the things I want to talk about? What are my themes I want to build? And then you want to take the time, slow down and take the time to build out what those messages are, and then carry them around. So when you're roving, you know, when I'm roving, I'm going to get to this particular viewpoint and there's these particular questions. Or I know right now we're having a real problem with fill in the blank squirrels that are hand fed, and we want to stop people feeding squirrels. So maybe I want a squirrel theme, and I want a river theme because we're going to look at the river. And so I want to talk about watersheds, or I want to talk about snow and climate change, or just figure out what is important for you to share and build out some themes. And then you play the game of, oh, someone asked a question that's related. How do I weave people towards getting to this theme so I can share this meaningful idea with them? Now, part of the way that we get people from here to there is with interpretive techniques. So that's the AT of this interpretive equation. And there are a bajillion interpretive techniques, and we don't have time to go in depth about that. That's a whole class unto itself. But I did give you the link for Handles, which is a research project that one student did, where she collected interpretive techniques from throughout the Park Service and put it into a big multi-page, it's a massive document of just by alphabetical order, different techniques. So you might ask questions to explore an idea, or you might do metaphors and analogies are amazing. You know, that fire is the house cleaner of the forest. This idea that fire is actually a good thing and cleans things up. So you make an analogy of what something like it. You know, glaciers are like bulldozers traveling down river canyons. Just figuring out what's something familiar to people that's relevant for people that you can make that link or that bridge. That's a technique. You can play a game. There are lots of different games to play. Books of that, I'm happy to share resources with you on just environmental education games. You can do a sensory experience, have people close their eyes and listen and figure out what they're hearing, or close their eyes and reach their hand into a bag and feel something. During COVID, I don't know how well that would work, but so using their senses to experience the world. You can tell a story. That's a technique. You could use a photo or a prop or a map to hook people or to share an idea. You could use the resources around you, have people go out and look for, find things, or look at things and then talk about what they're seeing. You can do all sorts of activities. You can act something out with your body. You can use puppets. So there's a whole realm of techniques that you can get creative with. And techniques are also nice because, you know, one of the things they say in Interp is you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. That some repetition is helpful in getting an idea across. And techniques are kind of like a way to tell them without telling them again. So they can explore it in a new way. with examples or with activities that let them see it in a new light. And it also gives some buffer if you're getting into exploring challenging topics. Like in Yosemite, we are looking at John Muir and how John Muir was profoundly important for the protection of Yosemite and wild space and the conservation movement. And he said a lot of very racist things. So how do you talk about how amazing he was and how uncomfortable some of his ideas were? And what do we do about that as a park and as individuals when we are holding these two things together? And so doing straight up talking about that may be awkward, but if you insert an appropriate technique, like maybe a dialogic question about contradiction in our own lives, and how do we explore contradictions in ourselves or in others and hold everything at the same time, that allows us to approach these intangible ideas without having it be so difficult to talk about. And then we can pivot off of that discussion about holding contradictions to then talk about John Muir, and it's like a softer transition. So techniques can also serve as a transitionary tool for us to get to an idea we want to get to. So I'll just add about appropriate techniques. There's a whole realm of interpretation that we're not talking about today called audience-centered experience, or ACE. And ACE is a particular approach to doing interpretation that's based on dialogue and dialogic questions. And ACE has their own collection of techniques that are dialogic techniques. So for example, we don't have the capacity on this Zoom call to do it today, but I could have in this format broken you off into breakout groups of 2s or 3s or 4s and had you have a short discussion about something and then come back and share with the group. That would be a dialogic technique to break into small groups. Another example of an ACE dialogic technique is maybe I have a question that's a little personal and you don't really want to share it out loud. Like maybe we're talking about loss and I have a question about something, what's something you've lost that was important to you? And we're going to later talk about the loss of biodiversity. But I ask that question of you, but I hand out index cards. And so everyone gets to write their answer on an index card and then give it back to me, and then I read them anonymously. So that's a technique that's also a dialogic technique within the audience-centered experiences realm that gives you some anonymity. So at the end of this, I'll give a link to the ACE techniques, and you can add them to your collection of ideas for how to do dialogue with folks. If you're interested in ACE, there's whole trainings on ACE. ACE is usually a 3 or 4 day training, and the Park Service offers that, and I'll have links to that at the end. Okay. Okay, I'm just checking on the text, which I haven't really been paying attention to. Awesome, great. So a technique is a bridge between the visitor and what you want to share. Okay, so before we get to ending an interaction, any questions so far? I want to put in the chat. Okay, I will say a couple things. One is when you conclude your ideas, it's nice to bring it back to the theme, so people just remember the main idea. That may or may not work in an informal interaction. You got to feel it out. And there's going to be times when you are asked questions and you do not know the answer, and it is okay. We cannot know the answers. It is very tempting as a new interpreters for us to BS and try to answer or, you know, get squirrely. We have an impossible job. Your job is to know everything about your site. You can't do it. So just give yourself a lot of permission to not know. It's just completely okay to not know, and be willing to say, gosh, I don't know. And then you have a lot of options. So you can say, I don't know. Let me see if I can find out right now. Or I don't know. would you like to come with me and we'll go figure it out at the library? Or, I don't know, would you like to give me your contact information? When I find out, I'll send it to you. Or, I don't know, but I do know that, and let me share some information related that's kind of sort of related, and maybe you'll be satisfying. Give yourself permission not to know. Okay. And lastly, ending an interaction can be a little awkward. How do you know when it's time? You might see their body language is shifting away, stepping back. You can do the same thing. Maybe you've got someone that wants to go on for another 2 hours and you've got more people to address or things to do. You can shift your body away or step back. There have been times I've even like started packing my bag and started walking and they followed me, but I'm giving physical signs that I'm done ending this interaction. And you can express your enjoyment of the interaction and thank them for spending time with you, or then recommend a thing that they could go do next to give them a sense of moving along. So that's a learning process too, to learn how do we end this conversation. And it may be that you have big dreams of how impactful you will be. And a lot of times you don't know what impact you have. And so giving them a little nugget sometimes is better than trying to give them everything and have them like have full transcendence while they're sitting with you. I have had more than one experience in my 20+ years in the service of thinking I did not have an impact, having an interaction with someone and having someone come back to me later and say, what happened there was really meaningful for me and this is why. So allow yourself to be conservative a little bit in what you offer and allow yourself to wrap up after a point has been made, to let people move forward and trust that it will percolate in them and might make changes beyond the time you're with them that will be meaningful. Okay, I have a little bit of extra material I'm not going to cover, but you'll have it when I give you the handout. What questions do you have for me? Oh, and while I'm thinking of it, you can think of your questions. Feel free to write them. In the meantime, I'll give you a couple little tidbits. So one is some definitions of interpretation. Thousands of naturalists are engaging in the work of revealing something of the beauty and wonder, the inspiration and spiritual meaning that lie behind what the visitor can with his senses perceive. Love it. And you see those intangibles, I put them in bold. Beauty, wonder, inspiration, and spiritual meaning is part of what we're doing with our work. Here's another one. Enos Mills, a famous interpretive giant. He was at Rocky. Nature guides see with the heart as well as an accurate eye. The nature guide is not a teacher. Nature guiding is more inspirational than informational. Love it. It makes me so happy. Oh yeah, and I was going to give you a little model before we finish, which is imagine you're at the visitor center desk and there's a plant, or like, you know, maybe you're out on the trail, you've got a little desk somewhere and there's a plant out with berries. And some visitors come up to you and they say, hey, what is that plant back there? So that's an information question, but it could be an opportunity for interpretation. And I might say, oh, we'll back up. I will say, I have a theme in my back pocket that relates to plants. And that theme is Yosemite Native peoples tended wild gardens of abundance for generations. So that's in my back pocket. And I'm like curious, I'm exploring in my mind. Can I put this theme to use in this circumstance? And I might say, I might ask some questions. Are you curious if it's edible? You know, there's a story in that plant. There's people in that plant. Do you have time for a little story? So I haven't answered their question yet. I've given them something a little provocative. There's a story, there's people in that plant. And I've asked the question, do you have time? And maybe they say no, and I say, what's planted? And maybe they say yes. And okay, now I've got an interpretive technique, I've got a story, and I'm going to take them towards my theme. And so I say, do you all have a garden? Do you grow anything at home? Do you have house plants? Do you have a garden outside? And maybe they share with me about that. So I'm using a technique of questioning to get them to relate to tending a garden. And I say, you know, in the national parks, Native peoples didn't live in one place. They traveled with the seasons in the world actually, but here in Yosemite, people traveled. And so even their idea of ownership was different. Different people were traveling through and using space. And so they didn't have like a set place year round to tend a garden like we do. But while they went, there were no stores, right? So they had to figure out how to get everything they needed with food and medicine and plants and materials. And so as they traveled, they were collecting those things from the local landscape, and they were tending to the landscape around them to encourage those things. So they are, for example, coming up to a plant that they use, they might use their digging stick to dig for the bulb of a plant they might eat, but they could also pull some of those bulbs if there was a ton of them in one place and redistribute to another place that maybe didn't have as many that would be useful on their travels. So they're doing some replanting, and as they're digging, they're actually tilling the soil, and they might be pruning. Willow, for example, and those branches pruned in the right way will make better basket making material. So they're doing some pruning. And they might be gathering and planting some seeds that will be useful in a particular place. And so all of that work they're harvesting is gardening. It's agriculture, but it looks totally different than what we see as agriculture, the way that we do it in our homes or in our big farm. So that plant is a white stem black raspberry. And it is so abundant and impressive, which is what probably made you be like, whoa, look at all those berries, because it's edible and you can eat it too. Don't eat things when someone doesn't tell you that you can, but I'm telling you right now you can for this particular plant in this place. But that is there in the way that it is because the valley and the plants here were tended gardens that were cared for by Native peoples for generations, and Native people still come and use these plants for food and medicine and supplies even today. So I told a little story, got some information in, and why I chose that theme and chose to talk about that is a variety of reasons. This relates to one of the main interpretive themes of Yosemite, of sharing about Native peoples. Climate change is happening in the Park Service climate change strategy. They want people to talk about climate change. And so this relates to the idea that our current method of living and consumption is putting pressure on wild systems and encouraging climate change. And so if I can take people on a journey that takes them to make a connection between Native peoples and tending or caretaking, it gives a model of a different way of relating to wild space than the one that we use in our culture. And so it both succeeds in touching on a Park Service mission as far as our park, but it also touches on talking about climate change and looks towards the future with hope for a new way of relating to wildness that's actually tending in a way that encourages it and us. So I get all of these needs met, my goals are met in choosing that theme and bringing it in. So the idea of like what white folks came to and thought was a wild landscape was actually a tended landscape of a different kind that we didn't recognize. And it's amazing to think that we're amongst it right now and we can't see it, it's invisible to us. It's kind of amazing. So this little moment, and that's all, that's a little moment. And they may want to go further with it or not, but that's a little example of how it might play out. Okay. I think we've wrapped up the main ideas. I'm going to check and see if you have questions for me. Okay. Sometimes a visitor will ask a question, they already know the answer. Absolutely. They have different needs that are getting met than information. It may be connection, it may be who knows. But yeah, sometimes they want to answer it for you or test you. I was out before, but the question about interpretation versus conservation education. So Lester was asking about what's the difference between interp and conservation education. And that's a new phrase to me. I just Googled it quickly. And it probably is pretty similar. The word education makes me think generally education has curriculum that's very set with particular goals of certain things that we want the students to retain, and specific information we want them to learn. In interp, I don't care if you remember any of the words. I don't need you to remember any specific things. I want to touch you in a way that is provocative or meaningful or connecting. So that's kind of a difference between interp and education. The next question from Jennifer, what about mixed age groups with children? Classic Interp says children's programs are separate and often that's not an option. That's true. If you can design a program for a particular group of kids at a certain age, that's awesome. And we can't always do that. And I have found young kids can actually get into some pretty deep topics if you stay at pace with them and stay connected to them. And adults like to play games too. So if you are forced to put kids and adults together and you're sensitive to what people's needs are and where they're at, you can meet everybody's needs. But ideally in interp, you're gonna have kids programs and adult programs be different. Any tips or techniques for educating or engaging in the name of interpretation and also enforcement? For example, you see someone having an illegal campfire and you want to educate, but also diplomatically, you want to tell them they're in violation of a forest order. It's a great question. Yeah, it's always a hierarchy. You're figuring out what's most important, right? Often I will start with what their needs are. So I might connect with them on the fact that they're enjoying themselves, or that it's such a beautiful time, and build some rapport with them first. And then we'll get to what the site needs are after I've made a connection with them. Sometimes when you go in hot and you go in with enforcement, people are resistant. And there's no one right answer, right? It's always a dance where you're feeling things out. But I would generally start with trying to figure out what their needs are right now, connecting with them on what they are enjoying or why they're doing what they're doing, and then share about why it doesn't work to do that in this space. Could I revisit the question I asked earlier about your insight into dealing with frustration or discouragement that happens when communicating with people who are uninterested or you can't find common ground with? P. Kushner, could you unmute yourself and tell me a little bit more verbally about the context to the question?
Hi, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute it. So I want your opinion, particularly just because you're in Yosemite, which is so busy, and you get lots of people from all over, and you have people who are coming not necessarily because they want to have a really emotional, eye-opening experience, but because it's the place to go and they want to just see it to see it. So I'm sure you come into contact with lots of people who you just everything you tell them doesn't seem to get to them, and you value the park for a different reason that they do, and it just seems that no matter what or how you engage them, you're not going to reach them in a way that you want to. And I just was wondering what your thoughts were dealing with people like that, probably pretty often, and just any tips for trying to find a common ground. Or I know you'll see things in the forest where people might leave a bunch of trash all over the place, and you yourself would obviously pick it up because you really value the park, but I was just wondering how you deal with that frustration.
Yeah, so less about techniques for how to talk to them, but how do I deal with it internally?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, I will answer that by a short story. I was a ranger for 2 years in Denali National Park, and we did all-day off-trail hikes with visitors. So 15 visitors. We'd get on the bus. I'd pick a random place. The bus would stop, and we just walk. There's no trails, so you just wander. And I had this woman. She was dragged there by her boyfriend. She didn't want to be there. She was frightened. She was annoyed. She just didn't want to be there, and she was there. And I was like, I am going to like touch her. I'm going to make a difference with this woman. And all day I was like sharing things and telling stories and trying to make connections. And we crossed ski slopes and crossed rivers, and we identified scat and tracks and bones. And I mean, I just like did all the things. And the end of the day, she was as miserable as the start of the day. And she got on the bus and she went away. And I was really devastated. I really was like, she was untouchable. Like I did all of my superpowers, interpretive superpowers, and they failed. 3 years later, that was Alaska. Now I'm in California for Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, and it's like thousands of people at this musical event, and I'm on a blanket with my friends, and this woman comes marching across the group and sits down at my blanket with me and says, "Hi, you probably don't remember me. I met you 3 years ago, but I saw your face and I couldn't believe it was you, and I have a story to tell you." And she turned to my friends and she said, "This woman was a ranger in Denali when I was dragged on this thing with my boyfriend, and I did not want to be there. I was unhappy. She was so inspired with what she was doing. She was so committed. She was so, like, she meant it. And she was so happy to be doing what she was doing that I was profoundly moved to see her joy and see what was possible for a woman in wilderness, which wasn't available to me before. And I was so changed by that experience, but I didn't even understand what had happened. And eventually my husband and I got married, and we had our anniversary in wilderness. And I love being outside because of that one day and what happened in that experience. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was in tears, she was in tears, my friends were all in tears. And then she went back to to be with whatever. She left. And I was like, okay, number one, job done. Like I can retire today. And number two, I have no idea how I am touching people. You just don't know. I had written her off as a failed experiment. I had mourned over her. That would be my answer to that question is, I just remember you don't know. Like I just hold the meaning and the value of what I do, and then I do my best and let the rest go and trust that the universe it'll make a difference.
Okay, thank you. You're gonna make me cry. Well, that was really helpful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Good. Yeah. How do you keep one person from dominating the group with their questions and verbiage? Oh, it's a tough one. I might try to ignore. And if it doesn't work to ignore, I might speak directly to them. And I might make a guess at what needs they have. So it sounds like you're really interested in sharing, or it sounds like you feel really strongly about this, or that you disagree. And I'll just make a direct request. And I'm having a hard time moving forward. And then that request might be, I'm going to request that you hold your ideas until the end, and I'd like to talk to you afterwards. Or I'd request that you ask questions when I offer a question time. But generally, acknowledging someone directly and making a direct request of them, often to say, I see you and I acknowledge you and I want to spend time with you, but not right now, is often effective. Jennifer turned off your audio and can't seem to turn it back on. That is a technical question that maybe Carl can help you with through private chat. Okay, we're 2 minutes over, so I'm going to see if there's one more question. Okay, so I love Interp, and I'm doing this voluntarily because I love to share. And so if you want to contact me later, my email will be sent to you, but it's Kara, K-A-R-A _Stella, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, E-L-L-A @nps.gov. And I'm happy to answer questions. We'll get the materials for this talk out to you. And I hope that you're excited by the possibilities of what interpretation can offer, and you do your own research because there's tons of material out there, and that you keep learning and growing in your interpretive career. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I'll be staying around a few minutes after the talk to answer any direct questions you folks have. Have a great rest of your weekend, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Cara, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, finally got back on. I missed the last few moments. That was so fantastic. I will have to listen. That was an amazing story about this person recognizing you at Hardly Strictly.
Powerful.
That's incredible.
It made me cry. It made me feel like what this matters, you know, what I do matters.
That really is an incredibly powerful story, but this was just exceptional. Thank you so much. We are going to look forward to exploring a lot of the resources you shared, and anyway, very grateful. And anything that we can ever do to, you know, help you out, just let me know.
Yeah, yeah. I have a couple tweaks on the resources that I'll add. So before you send it out, I'll give you like the final updated copy.
Great. And I guess we've lost most folks, but I was just also just really happy with the turnout, and we will be sharing this. This will eventually be on MPIA's website, so you'll have access to your own session to share with others. I don't know, do you actually have other recorded sessions of your own training?
No, we've all done live training until COVID. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, that was so fabulous. Thank you so much. And that was just very interactive, even without the groups. I loved the fact that we could all see what everybody was doing in terms of creating themes and responding to the scenario. So I thought it worked great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, interaction is so helpful for keeping people engaged.
Great. And thanks again to Carl for being our Zoom guru. Yes. And we'll be back next Saturday for anybody that wants to join us, 9 to 11 with session 2 on conducted activities.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Big hand.
Yay.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.